Let me welcome everyone in person and everyone who's zoomed in with us as well. Welcome you to the first that we know of the first religious studies undergraduate research showcase. Professor Burns and I were impressed with some of our students' research, and so we wanted to create a platform for them to be able to share and to get some feedback. I am Professor Terry Shoemaker. I am an associate teaching faculty here in religious studies. I'm going to be the moderator today, just so you know how we're going to go about. While we're doing this, feel free to get up and get yourself some food or something, not anything to drink. Get yourself some food. And we'll make this formally informal is the approach. We're going to go right down in this order. Each panelist will have 15 minutes to present their work, and then at the end, I'll share just it's going to be the roughest comments ever. I'll give a few comments and maybe a question to our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to you all to ask questions about their projects. All right. To my left, we have Yvé Dizes, who is a religious studies student at ASU and Barrett's Honor College, whose work explores mythology, meaning-making, and esoteric practice as tools for rebuilding shared symbolic culture and fragmented communities. That's a lot. Her thesis investigates whether structured contemplative practices can function as relational consciousness technologies, bridging the divide between secular and sectarian worldviews. And her project today is titled Reclaiming Myth and Meaning.
Okay. I'm not used to sitting down and talking to people, so please forgive me because I'm gonna probably move around. So this project is born out of nearly 2 decades of independent research. I actually decided to come back to school because of what I was experiencing and exploring like out in the world as a person doing things. So I was trying to come up with visuals. I'm not a visual learner, but really the inspiration for why I'm here and what I'm doing is I really feel as though Western civilization has systematically trained individuals to experience themselves as very bounded. So this hyper individualization, especially of like spiritual or religious beliefs, fosters a disconnection and or magical thinking. So that's kind of the other side of this, which is important for how I've designed my project as well. And then ultimately my more philosophical, like ontological argument is that relationship is the ground floor of reality. And so when we consider that relationship is the ground floor of reality, that becomes sort of the guiding light for designing something that might help heal the fracture and the hyper-individualization, which is what very much deeply interests me. I think a lot of standard interventions fail because they operate merely at the level of belief. And I think belief is not the fundamental level of what we have to explore. It's just adding more cognitive layers on top of existing frameworks without actually touching the underlying root of those individual fractures. So I'm interested in seeing, is there a way to create a shared mythology that gets buy-in from people that helps us to alleviate some of that extreme fracture in a way that is not asking you to buy into a dogma. Next slide, please. Okay, so I designed this. It sounds crazy, but I'm teaching telepathy. And let me just start by saying that the goal of the class is not to prove that telepathy is real. So that is very, very important. I personally believe telepathy is real, and I've had a lot of amazing experiences, or I wouldn't be using it, but I don't really care if anybody else believes that it's real. That's not the point. The practice itself is, or the design is, 10 participants. It actually turned into 12 participants because I couldn't say no to 2 people who wanted to do it. It's 5 weeks, 75 minutes per week, and the structure of the classes is actually the experiment itself. So the classes are like a Socratic dialogue. So what I'm really looking at is, in the discovery of telepathy, each cohort is designing their own definition of telepathy. So they're co-creating a shared mythological experience with their own symbols as they go through the process. at the end of this, what I have seen, because I've done this research not through a university, just on my own, and what I found was that people who participated in this at the end came out much more curious. They came out much more willing to investigate other people's beliefs and their own in a meaningful way. And each group experienced this concept of telepathy in its own unique way. So, next slide, please. Thanks. So this is the three interlocking moves that I think make my methodology sound. Is one, the Socratic container. So if the ontological plane that relationship is the foundation of reality, then the Socratic method itself is demonstrating that, because in that Socratic back and forth, you are co-creating reality in this class itself. And then two, using a mythological frame, which is the telepathy. It ensures that participants are holding concepts as more generative. So because nobody has, I don't think anybody in this room could say, like, here's how telepathy works, here's what it is, right? Like, there is no set explanation. It's too weird for materialists, and it's too kind of woo-woo for religion. Like, it's just sort of fits in this nebulous place, and yet people can't help being fascinated by it. I mean, there's tens of thousands of studies on telepathy. So there's clearly something that intrigues humans about this, but there's not enough preconceived dogma about it for people to get trapped in their own belief narratives. So it's a really cool way to play in myth building. And then, which is like the transgressive part is also, it's for stress testing the fact that there's no dogmatic adherence. It forces the participants to create that. Next slide, please. I talked about this a little bit, but why telepathy? It's sort of the gap in the map. I've tried this with I've tried playing with ideas that were more basic or more foundational to either a religion or to a spirituality, like tarot, for example, and it just wasn't weird enough. People were not willing to set down their very rigid beliefs about things and come together to co-create a new definition or a new experience. But for whatever reason, telepathy functions in that gap. And then, yep, I think I've already talked about this. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the setup. It's 5 weeks, and each week does build. So they're all building. The first week starts with measurements of how much conviction versus curiosity you're bringing into the class, but also I think it tends to be a pretty good indicator of how much conviction versus curiosity people bring into the world. And of course, lack of curiosity is, I think, at the root of extreme individualism. So we've all sort of decided that we're going to stand under our own umbrella of belief and what's right. And rather than seeing, oh my gosh, is there a larger umbrella we could all stand under together and have a really great conversation, we've become very settled in trying to convince others that our umbrella is the best umbrella. So we want people to stand under our umbrella. So we start week 1, we're just looking at that. Like, we're with no judgment, just sort of doing blind testing to see how people respond with either conviction or curiosity. We start to progress that. So week 2, we start to look at unconscious mythologies. So this is really starting to examine through Socratic dialogue what you already do or don't believe and how rigidly you believe that. So how willing are you to play in somebody else's mythology versus how much are you going to adhere to your own mythology? And then week 3 is where we get into some of the actual techniques, where this looks a lot like, from the outside, you might think it looks like guided meditation and other sort of like esoteric ritual practices. I did train with a sorcerer from the Chingu tribe in Brazil for 5 years and with a yogi of the Ananda lineage for another 5 years. So I draw on those 2 lineages to create the actual techniques that I'm using. So they're not out of nowhere, and they are techniques that I've been trained in. And in week 3, we talk about experiencing the extra super very, which is Shoemaker's term here. And I think that experiencing the extra super very is what makes people interested in telepathy. So The extra super very being extraordinary, supernatural, or very meaningful events. And the desire to experience that, which may have also been called like the numinous in the past, is what makes people so attracted to telepathy. It's that like drive for the extra super very. And then finally in week 4, we get into, at this point in week 4, the people in the cohort are comfortable with each other. So this is where we start to get into a space where I'm really encouraging them to disagree. I'm encouraging them to see if they can maintain a container of empathy even as they disagree. And can we have a bidding process for relational safety inside of this creation of a shared symbolic mythology? And I think that's really important because ultimately that's what we're going to need to do as a species if we would like to get out of this like hyper individualized set of beliefs and like conviction mode. And then finally, week 5 is integration and co-creation. So in week 5, we are really coming together, and I ask every single person who participates to give their definition of telepathy and why they think this experience was important. So it really does put the onus back on them and their experience. Next slide, please. So obviously this is all like kind of out there, so I had to come up with some metrics of how I was going to try to track like what's working, what's not. So to do this, I did use a few surveys that were pre-existing. They're mostly like psychological surveys. And then I created one of my own as well because there just wasn't an existing survey to capture what I was hoping to capture. But the surveys themselves, basically the image on your right shows the map of what the different surveys are collecting. So those 4 metrics is what we're trying to get a sense of both before and after. And then there is also going to be I'm going to do a one-on-one interview with all of the participants in the cohort as well to see how that experience went for them. And then the next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah. So then basically this is a structured esoteric practice, and the container itself is supposed to be emblematic of the path, the solution toward coming under a shared sacred canopy or rediscovering a collective mythology that is not dogmatic, it is not sectarian, nor is it specific to any one lineage. So something that anybody could step into the container and experience. You don't actually have to believe in telepathy to do this. In fact, most of the people who've done this with me did not believe in telepathy, and it was still beautiful. So I'm just seeing if I'm forgetting anything by passing. Yeah, so yeah, I think I covered it all actually. I feel like I could keep rambling forever, but I'll leave it there.
And so her project is actually starting
today.
The first cohort, and then Wednesday night the second cohort. So she's built the project. The data gathering is going to happen in the next 5 to 6 weeks, and then she has the fall semester to write this project. Thank you so much. So we are going to hold questions until the very end. Our second panelist, unfortunately, is ill and can't be with us, but let me introduce her anyways because it's her work. Our second panelist is Ginger McMahon, who is a religious studies scholar majoring in religious studies with an emphasis in political and global affairs and communications. Her project analyzes Mormon missionary service in BYU football and how that influences a shift from valuing external validation to internal validation. And her professor, Professor Devin Burns, is going to be reading her paper for her today, which is called The Shot Clock Sacrifice.
Hello, I'm not Ginger, I'm Dr. Burns. I'm going to read exactly what Ginger has on the sheet. If you have any questions for Ginger, you can email her. But I'm very happy to be sharing her work. She has done a lot of fantastic research on this project. I am both very proud of her and of Luke. Hello, everyone. It is a privilege to be here with you all today. That's great, sure. Thank you to Dr. Burns and Dr. Shoemaker for organizing this panel for Luke, Yvé, and I. We are all grateful for your attendance and engagement. My name is Ginger McMahon, and I am a religious studies with an emphasis in political and global affairs and communications double major, and a student athlete, a swimmer, at Arizona State University from 2022 to 2026. I'm a Lutheran Christian and have, since I was little, found an innate drive to understand not only what religion means for me, but what it means for people across different cultures and contexts around the world. In my time here at ASU, I have been exposed to a wide range of religious traditions, perspectives, and academic teachings that have challenged and expanded my understanding of faith, identity, and global conflict. I found a gravitating pull to study religion and sports, considering my positionality as a collegiate athlete. This paper, The Shot Clock Sacrifice, Mormonism, Football, and Sacrifice, combines my academic interest with studying a religious culture different from my own, Mormonism, while incorporating my fascination for sports. Next slide, please. What is a holy war? In the context of religious studies, a holy war is described as a religiously justified war to serve a sacred purpose. But what if the term holy war wasn't in reference to the Crusades in the 13th century, or the early Islamic conquests in the 7th and 8th centuries? What if instead it was characterized by the intense and competitive athletic rivalry between Brigham Young University and the University of Utah? The annual football matchup between the two rivals schools has taken on the name Holy War, and the rivalry runs deep. This rivalry is unique in that BYU is a private university owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon religion, while the University of Utah is a public university not officially affiliated with the religion. Mormon members believe in Jesus Christ and are religiously affiliated with Christianity. The Church of Latter-day Saints was founded in 1830 when American religious leader Joseph Smith received a divine revelation from God and created the Book of Mormon, which is used in tandem with the teachings in the Bible. The theme of sacrifice is central to the Church of Latter-day Saints beliefs. Mormon men and women under the age of 25 are encouraged to serve leadership missions, either domestically or internationally, as a means of spreading the gospel. In keeping with the theme of sacrifice, the origin of athletics is deeply tied to spirituality, as sports have been seen to shape social dynamics in ancient Greek society, and in the modern era have been seen for shaping athletes' personal habits. In the game of football specifically, the sacrifice needed for the athletes to be their best selves can be seen through their dedication to respecting their team and themselves. It allows for people of all backgrounds to come together and work towards a common goal. Keeping this distinction in mind, the idea of Mormonism in sports becomes an intriguing subject. Questions about religious sacrifice became a focal point of this research, specifically the notion of Mormon missionary sacrifice and its direct correlation to sport performance and player mentality. BYU football players have shared their personal experiences serving a mission and have credited the experience to boosting their athletic performance and passion for their faith. Next slide, please. Missionary service within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints redefines success and sacrifice in collegiate athletics by creating an identity shift in the athletes from prioritizing external values, such as personal performance and playtime, to internal values, such as discipline and spiritual growth. Throughout this presentation, I will guide us through history, taking us back to the origins of football in the United States, while analyzing BYU football and concluding with individual mission statements from BYU football players. Next slide. In the United States, football is more than just a sport. It creates community, builds national recognition, and is considered by some to be a form of religion in itself. The origin of football in the United States did not, however, fit any of those characteristics mentioned above. Instead, it was a disorganized and often violent mess, with teams of 12 individuals creating their own sets of rules and regulations. The sport became so dangerous, President Theodore Roosevelt was urging colleges to reform the game by creating safety regulation practices. Violence in sports is nothing new. In fact, it is a fairly common concept among male Christian athletes. Muscular Christianity is a term used to describe a form of manliness and obsession with physical health. It is meant to promote engagement in athletics while also expressing traditional Christian ethics, such as strength and sacrifice. Within this framework, sacrifice became expected and praised among male athletes. Physical pain, injuries, and emotional turmoil were seen as necessary in order to pursue excellence and perform at the highest level. In this way, the culture of football can mirror what sacrifice looks like in religion. When one gives everything they have, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, to a cause greater than themselves, it is seen as a demonstration and commitment to something greater, whether that be one's own team or faith. Next slide. The road to establishing the Mormon faith was one filled with strife and struggle. Born into an unsuccessful farming family, Joseph Smith was determined to grow deeper in his faith and subsequently questioned the denominational differences surrounding him in the Christian tradition. Fearing that he had fallen off the, quote, right path, Smith begged God for forgiveness and was greeted by the angel Moroni, sharing the location of a book written on gold plates located in the neighboring hillside. It was Joseph's job to locate the plates, as they contained, quote, the fullness of the everlasting gospel. His dedication and perseverance to locate the gold plates directly correlates to how an athlete approaches training for their sport. When something mentions a lot to you, or when something means a lot to you, in Joseph's case, the gold plates and the athlete's winning, engaging in sacrifice is inevitable and worth the trials that come with it. Joseph Smith and his followers were subjected to intense violence through destruction of their holy books, the Book of Commandments, state-sanctioned expulsion from Mormon settlements scattered across the United States, and a brutal killing spree that claimed the lives of 17 Mormon individuals in Missouri, leading to Western relocation. These extreme hardships within the Mormon community strengthened not only the group's collectivist faith in the LDS religion, but also made members more resilient and devoted to spreading the gospel. LDS members refused to look at themselves as victims, and instead viewed suffering as a testing of their faith and a sign of divine will. Just as the Mormon people were subjected to the testing of their faith, the same can be applied to the realm of sports. Athletic culture often glorifies suffering as a way to enhance performance. Suffering such as intense physical exhaustion, pushing through injury, and outside judgment of the individual, especially pertaining to comments surrounding body image, are all indicators of dedication to one's sport. The willingness to endure hardship is the foundation of having an athletic identity, mirroring the ways religious communities, such as Mormons, may interpret suffering as a demonstration of one's faith. Next slide, please. The next few slides will introduce 3 personal testimonies from BYU football stars, elaborating on their mission services. The experiences of a Mormon mission prioritize an establishing of internal identity rather than gaining external recognition. Missionaries spend extended periods of time in service, with their work emphasizing discipline, humility, and personal accountability that reinforces a sense of worth rooted internally, rather than the need to be validated by others, whether that's from coaches, teammates, family members, or the media. In sports, success is frequently measured through athletic performance and achievements, awards, praise, accolades. For missionaries, however, their value is cultivated through obedience to their faith and for their commitment to following a higher power, regardless of the outcomes. Praise and recognition become irrelevant, and the art of sacrifice becomes meaningful because it affirms one's identity and devotion on both a spiritual and personal level. Here are 3 personal messages from BYU football players partaking in the mission. Cannon Davies, is a defensive back for the BYU Cougars. He is a freshman and performed a 2-year mission service for the LDS Church. Here's what he had to say about his mission. One of the biggest lessons that my mission taught me was that Christ's sacrifice isn't just so that we can be forgiven for our sins, but it is the redeeming power that we rely on in every aspect of our lives. He is the reason we can find strength and healing, overcome our challenges and imperfections. The advice my dad always gave me was to, quote, remember to do the right things the right way, which is the missionary way, which is to work harder than you've ever worked, study harder than you've ever studied, pray harder than you've ever prayed, be perfectly obedient, and love those you serve. Love ya, proud dad. And internal quote, missionaries, go make your dad proud, but more importantly, make your heavenly Father proud. End quote. Next slide. Andrew Gentry is an offensive tackle who is in his final year of eligibility with the BYU football team. Here's what he had to say about his mission service. Of all the preparation I did to play football, nothing prepared me better than my mission. Both on a mission and on the football field, we push our minds and bodies to the limit. The constant grind can take its toll. But during my mission, I learned that the work I was doing each day was tied to a far higher purpose than simply knocking on doors or talking to people. Once I understood my true purpose and connected everything I did to it, I stopped simply enduring the grind. I began to love it. We are not simply playing football to gain glory for ourselves, but to glorify our God. When we make that connection and remember the higher purpose, the tough days become the best part of the journey. That is when we find true joy, playing the game we love while glorifying the God we love even more. Slide change. Keanu Tanuvasa is a defensive lineman for the BYU Cougars and transferred from the University of Utah. Here's what he had to say about his mission and how much it has shaped both his athletic and spiritual journeys. I think about football. There are practices where my body is shot and the reps don't look clean. But when I lean on my teammates and coaches, I find a way to push through. It's not me being strong, it's me being lifted. Missions work the same way. Another example on my mission, there were weeks with no progress. It felt like failure. But looking back, those were the weeks I learned to pray harder, study deeper, and trust Christ even more. That weakness was training me. So when you feel like you're running on empty, remember, weakness isn't the end. It's the exact place that his strength shows up. That's when you'll see the miracles. End quote. While examining the intersections of faith, sport, and sacrifice, it becomes clear that athletics are not just in physical arenas, but are deeply symbolic spaces where identity, meaning, and belief are constantly altered and formed. Across both football culture and religious life, sacrifice emerges as a central principle in shaping how individuals understand commitment, purpose, and ultimately themselves. Within the framework of muscular Christianity, sacrifice is often embodied through physical endurance, aggression, and discipline. Pain and emotional turmoil become markers of dedication, and the willingness to endure hardship is celebrated both as an athletic and spiritual virtue. For many male Christian athletes, this creates a toughness. However, when placed alongside the experiences of Mormon missionaries and athletes at Brigham Young University, a more complex understanding of sacrifice begins to emerge. The examples given previously from Canon Devries, Andrew Gentry, and Keanu Tanuvasa challenge the assumption that athletic sacrifices are inherently tied to physicality or recognition, instead revealing it as a broader, more nuanced practice shaped by religious worldview. Football, often viewed as a site of external validation and performative sacrifice, can also function as a space where deeply held beliefs about discipline, suffering, and purpose are reinforced. At the same time, Mormon missions demonstrate that sacrifice does not need to be publicly visible to have meaning. If I were to have more time researching this project, I think it would be fascinating to study muscular Christianity in relation to women and female athletes. Much of the existing data centers on male bodies and traditional viewpoints surrounding masculinity. Exploring this gap would offer a more comprehensive understanding of how religious and athletic expectations intersect across gender, and whether similar forms of sacrifice are internalized, challenged, or redefined within women's athletic experiences. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Burns, for reading that for us. And our last panelist is Luke Salazar, who is a senior at ASU. Congrats, studying anthropology and religious studies. His work examines how policy decisions around housing, infrastructure, and land use impact communities' daily lives. He hopes to pursue a career in public policy and community-centered work. His project is titled Redlining and Religion in Los Angeles.
Hello, my name is Luke Salazar, and thank you, Dr. Shoemaker and Dr. Burns, for setting this all up. Like Dr. Shoemaker said, I'm a senior studying anthropology and religious studies, and currently for this capstone project, I'm focusing on how planning, land use, and redevelopment in post-war mid-century Los Angeles was weaponized against immigrant and non-white communities. Specifically, how those disruptions affected Mexican American families in Chavez Ravine and Boyle Heights. My family came to Los Angeles from Mexico in the 1940s. The stories my grandfather tells me about the city and the city that I grew up experiencing are not the same city, and that gap is what this research is about. It is important to note that the traditions of the fractured communities did survive. They exist today, but simply acknowledging that survival wouldn't be doing anyone justice. Calling it resilience and moving on is, as religious studies scholars of Black New Orleans, Laura McKay and Deion Haywood put it, a good word for the bad guys. It lets the governmental and legal systems that created the harm escape accountability by making us admire the people who survived them instead of interrogating why survival was necessary. So this talk is not primarily about survival in Los Angeles. It is about what urban destruction was done, who did it, and why it was done the way it was. Targeted and sustained violence were dressed up in the language of progress and urban planning so that no single person ever had to say out loud what the policies were actually for. For this talk, I will be focusing on the events of the mid-20th century estimation of the three neighborhoods of Chavez Ravine, Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. Next slide, please. Nestled within the hills northeast of downtown Los Angeles, Chavez Ravine was home to more than 1,100 multi-generational families across three neighborhoods, Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. Photographer Don Normark, who documented the community heavily in 1949, called it a poor man's Shangri-La. Chicano studies scholar Ronald Lopez describes it as a healthy, multi-generational Mexican barrio with the highest proportion of property owners and the highest social indicators of any Mexican-American community in the LA area. Families ran their own schools and churches, grew food on their land, and maintained the kind of dense neighborhood sociality that planners of the period consistently failed to recognize as anything other than disorder. Next slide, please. The mechanism for destroying it was quiet on paper. Beginning in 1933, the Homeowners Loan Corporation produced residential security maps grading neighborhoods A through D on investment risk. Chavez Ravine received a C, which indicated it was declining. Boyle Heights, for example, received a D, which labeled it as hazardous. Those grades determined whether federal mortgage insurance would flow into a neighborhood. Without it, no bank would write a loan, not to buy a home, not to repair one either. So buildings deteriorated, streets went unrepaired, city services stopped arriving. After 20 years of that deliberate disinvestment, officials looked at these neighborhoods and called them blighted. The Housing Act of 1949 made blight designation legal grounds for clearance through eminent domain. The same system that caused the deterioration and used the deterioration as its justification for removal. No one had to say we are targeting a Mexican American or an immigrant or a non-white community. The papers said we are clearing blight. In 1950, eviction notices were delivered to residents of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. The notices promised fair compensation, first choice of the new public housing development, Elysian Heights, and relocation assistance. Most of those promises went unfulfilled. Those who stayed were labeled squatters on land their families had lived on for generations. Next slide, please. I want to argue that what was destroyed in Chavez Ravine was not only a neighborhood, it was the spatial infrastructure of a community's religious life. I'm working through a lived religion framework drawn from scholars like Robert Orsi and Meredith McGuire, which understands religion not as doctrine or institution, but as the embodied practice embedded in specific places. The home altar in the corner of a kitchen, the procession route walked every December for Las Posadas, the church where your family has marked every baptism, birthday, and funeral for 3 generations. These are not decorations around religious life, they are religious life. Kim Knott's spatial theory sharpens this. Religion is not situated in space, it is produced through it. Space functions simultaneously as a medium, a methodology, and an outcome. When you destroy the space, you destroy the conditions under which that religion was possible. Sonia Hazard's works on thing theory adds one more layer. The cleared lot and the demolished block are active forces that restructure what community and daily life look like. You can repeal a law, but you cannot unfold concrete. And I want to be explicit. I'm not simply telling a story of survival. When I describe what the community practiced and what was lost, I'm describing the full weight of what destruction caused, not what was salvaged from it. Next slide. Religion in Chavez Ravine did not confine itself to Sunday mornings. It moved through daily life in ways McGuire would recognize as characteristics of lived religion, woven into the textures of routine, dependent on proximity and repetition, inseparable from the physical landscape. Home altars dedicated to the Virgin of Guadalupe organized domestic space, a corner shelf holding her image, candles, photographs of the dead. The altar was not separate from the household, it was the center of it. Each December, Las Posadas moved through the streets of the neighborhood in 9-night reenactment of Mary and Joseph's search for shelter, moving from house to house, singing, being turned away, and finally being welcomed. The meaning of the practice depended entirely on moving through a familiar shared geography, specific houses, specific neighbors, specific corners that have accumulated years of the same ritual. The churches built like Santo Nino in the red were where baptisms, quinceañeras, and funerals were observed, where the community marked time and transmitted its practices across generations. Seasonal feasts gathered extended kid networks in yards where food was grown. Mutual aid moved through those same networks. The community organized itself around the calendar of the Catholic year because that calendar was also the calendar of its shared social life. This is what Knock means when she says religion is produced through space. The streets, the yards, the proximity of the neighbors who shared the same saints and the same calendar. That was not backdrop to religious life. It was the medium through which religious life was even possible. Next slide, please. Residents fought back. At public hearings before the City Planning Commission in 1951, hundreds of residents, most of them women, filled the chambers to testify. Agnes Serta, on the left, secretary of the community's organizing body, told the commission directly, they came out here to the land of liberty and justice for all. The housing authority comes in now and tries to take their homes away from them. It is not justice and it is not American policy. Unfortunately, the hearings changed nothing. Next slide. By 1952, Chavez Ravine was effectively a ghost town. The public housing project that had justified the takings was killed by anti-communist politics and buried when Mayor Norris Olson took office in 1953. What followed was not a return of the land to its residents. The city deeded 300 acres of Chavez Ravine to the Brooklyn Dodgers, selling it for only $1. The deal itself was politically explosive. Proposition B placed on the June 1958 ballot to ratify it, passed by fewer than 26,000 votes out of nearly 700,000 cast, a margin of only 3%. City council members charged that Mayor Wilson had engineered a backroom agreement at a public expense. The terms for that changed out. The Dodgers also received Wrigley Field in South Central Los Angeles, while the city got a stadium it did not own, built by a private franchise with private profit on land it cleared at its own cost. Next slide, please. There is one more dimension to what the stadium represented. Baseball was not merely a pastime in Mexican-American Los Angeles. Historian Richard Simpkin described it as functioning like family and religion, the institutional thread that united the community. The celebrated Carmelita Chorizo team of East LA, the New York Yankees of their league, were the organizational backbone of mutual aid networks that grew into actual political organizations. Games drew entire communities, food stands, mariachis, chartered buses. Baseball was a form of civic and sacred life, a place where Mexican-American identity was performed and defended in public. We built a stadium on the ruins of what is Chavez Ravine, and market it as the home of that sport to the same communities. That its place was not an oversight, it was a particular kind of cruelty. Next slide, please. The final evictions came on May 8, 1959. The Arachiga family, 36 years at 1771 Malvina Street in Palo Verde, refused to leave. Two of their daughters were physically carried from their houses. One was handcuffed and arrested. The father left only when a bulldozer began to level his home while he was still inside of it. 141 days later, ground was broken in Crowder Stadium. What was eliminated was not merely housing. It was the accumulated spatial infrastructure of a community's religious and social life. The streets where processions moved for decades, the yards where families gathered, the churches where life was marked and transmitted across generations. Robert Orsi writes that for communities he studied, the path to to the divine was the same dense and trying and joyous and painful path that they trod every day. That path, the actual physical path through the actual streets, is what was taken. The streets where processions and religious life moved were paved over for a stadium parking lot. What I am arguing today is that the lived religion framework lets us see something conventional urban history consistently misses. When we look at Chavez Ravine only as a housing story, what was lost in it? What was lost is counted in units, 1,100 families, 3 neighborhoods, and 300 acres. When we look at it through the lens of lived religion and spatial theory, the scale of loss changes greatly. What was destroyed was the medium through which a community produced its sacred life, the routes, the proximity, the accumulated repetition of practice in specific places. None of that can be relocated or compensated. It required that specific geography, and that geography is now gone. Next slide, please. The broader pattern is not unique to Los Angeles. The same logic that cleared Chavez Ravine sent Interstate 95 through Overtown in Miami, Interstate 94 through the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul, and Interstate 40 through Black neighborhoods in Nashville. In each of those clearings, the same question applies. What exactly was lost, and by whose framework are we counting it? That is a question a lived religion approach forces us to take seriously, and it is a question urban history cannot answer without us. Next slide, please. Oh, the project opens on several questions I've not been able to address here. A fuller account of what followed in Boyle Heights, the murals, the self-help graphics, the lowrider culture, the Chicano poetry would be the companion argument for this one. An attempt to rebuild the spatial conditions for religious life in the fragmented landscape the freeways left behind. And more urgently for the field, if religion is produced through space, what does religious studies owe to urban planning scholarship and vice versa? These disciplines have been talking past each other about the same clearings for decades. This project is one argument for why that conversation is overdue. Thank you.
Thanks to our 2 panelists and for Professor Burns for leading the project of the third. I think these 3 projects, one, showed the breadth of what can be studied in religious studies. Obviously, we have a qualitative focus group study about spirituality and reenchantment. We have a religion and sports project that's historical and then small qualitative integration. And then we have a religion and public policy. And I didn't know Luke's project and sports, which is the historical kind of mining of what happened to this community. And so it's really fascinating to see just the spectrum of what you can do with the toolkit of religious studies. And they're all phenomenal projects. So just a couple of things I think these projects have in common. One, all of the projects really resist reducing religion to simply beliefs. This is something when you're in religious studies as a scholar, you are trained on this over and over and over again, that religion is more than beliefs. Although most people, person on the street, religion is reduced to simply a belief. And that probably owes to our Protestant history, and there's obviously some stuff there. Luke really wants us to push past beliefs and understand that lived religion was lost in LA at this particular moment. And I think you did a really kind of a phenomenal job of like really diving in and bringing to life that community for us. And not that the belief system were lost, they probably carried that with them, but the lived aspect of that shared community was lost. Ginger Project, football, the football field as a place to live out sacrifice, right? It's almost an extension of religious understanding. And as someone that studies religion and sports, it's awesome, right? And I think there's a lot more there, especially with that BYU Utah State rivalry.
Yeah.
University of Utah rivalry, right? It's like religion versus the state. It's LDS versus secularism, right? Things play out on the field. And these particular players are bringing this missionary sacrifice understanding to the sport itself, which I think is fascinating to think about. Then Evie recognizes the disconnections that we have socially and seeks to measure a possible solution to this disconnection. And so the two things that I see really interesting. One, sports are everywhere and they're always going to be everywhere and everyone should study sports. No, I'm joking. I'm being hyperbolic. And I'm constantly like, so I would say I'm the direct supervisor of Evie's project. So I knew this one. And this is honestly the first that I heard Ginger or Luke's project. We spoke just very little. And honestly, I didn't know the Dodgers thing. But obviously the BYU football, the Dodgers integration into this story. And then I'm going to quote Evie, who said she wants to see if we're able to play in someone else's mythology, right? And then speaking beforehand about a project, and she can validate this, she was thinking about, is there any remnants of shared mythology left around the globe in our societies? And she was telling me this. I didn't ask this because I'm not looking for religion and sports everywhere, I promise. And she's like, it's the Olympics. And I was like, there you go. Right? It's that connection of religion and sports is super interesting. And I think the three projects really get to this idea of connection. Of like, what are we socially connected to? Is it just individual sacred umbrellas that we're carrying around, or is there a shared sacred canopy that we live under? Does that canopy actually reside at a football field? And then are those canopies kind of vulnerable to outside influences? Scholarship tells us that the origin of the word religion is religio, which as best we can tell simply means to bind. We don't know what it means. Is it like a human binding? Is it human to something else binding? And so I think these projects get at the root of religion. And so I want to ask the two who are here, and jump in if you want, but it's up to you. Sociologists, when they talk about religion, they usually talk about the 4 B's: belief, which we're going to set aside, belonging, bonding, behavior are the 4. And I would actually toss in a 5th, which sometimes gets tossed in, of becoming, because as humans, we're always becoming. And so my question for you, before we open it up, is out of that belonging, bonding, so belonging is just you're part of an in-group, bonding, the connections that you have with the people of that in-group, and then the behaviors that you all agree are the commonalities in the way one should live. Which one of those 3 B's do you think best, if you had to pick one, and I know it's impossible, but if you had to pick one, best gets at the project that you're doing and why? Either one, whichever one you feel and jump in.
Belonging, I believe, because it kind of, especially in the realm of religion and spirituality, it shows you where you kind of stand and gives you a community and to actually support your beliefs in a way.
Yeah, so we understand who we are based off of who we're with and who our people are.
Yeah, where you feel that belonging can, I mean, I'm sure belonging can come before the belief even as well. Or, yeah.
And before I ask, for your project, where did you, your best evidence in your research, where did you find the most good stuff?
Well, there is one, like source-wise, there's one documentary, it's about like 30 minutes long. That was really, there's a lot of people from Chavez Ravine actually speaking, and Facebook actually, there are groups like that live there as children, and they reunite at Dodger Stadium every year, organize it with the Dodgers, and so they're posting about it all the time, and yeah, so that Facebook.
And that reunion at the stadium is probably like a project within itself.
Yeah, it's bittersweet, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's its own conference paper.
So, Evie, belonging, bonding, behavior.
I'm actually going to go with the one you added, becoming.
Okay.
I also want to clarify that I was very resistant to finding a sports ball application to my project. I'm not a sports ball person, but I had
Sports ball.
So I had the realization that the Olympics were an illustration of a shared mythology. I was like, gosh darn it, Shoemaker got it.
Like, there's actually two articles on
So I just wanted to clarify that. But yeah, I would say becoming, because I really, there's she's a physicist and a feminist, or they're a physicist and a feminist scholar as well. Karen Barrett, who wrote a book called Meeting the Universe Halfway, which is a huge inspiration for me. And I really do see reality as a shared becoming. And I think that probably religion and, you know, the way that we then choose to believe what we believe is in essence us trying to understand that experience of shared becoming. So I would say that my research is very interested in how we become together.
Interesting. You know, I don't want to force it, but
So with one, is it bond or bind? Bonding. I think that, I mean, obviously I think belonging does fit within what gender, like the structure and the scaffolding that she put. But I also think bond, because I think what is kind of necessary for that like football piece is that kind of participation in a team, in that kind of community structure. But I also think that that can be ported onto these like understandings of missionary activity, because they're very actively seeking that internal validation, but through like forcing themselves into these places where they don't fit, where they're going as an outsider and trying to become an insider, and they're like working on those bonds. In my, you know, artistic rendition of Ginger right now. Ginger totally disagree. You can ask her.
thank you. I do want to open it up. We're at the top of the hour. I do want to open it up for questions, and your questions can be directed to a single project or a more broad question for all the panelists to consider. But yeah, and I think your question should include a word that starts with the letter B, just to keep with the patterns. That would be awesome. And if someone could include sports ball in your question, that would be amazing too. Let me open it up.
Well, I actually have a sports related question, and I apologize if it's been beyond kind of this project, Luke. But it's like this is so interesting. Like I have heard of like the history behind No Chavez Ravine and like that relationship with the Dodgers. But something I'm like wondering with all that, and I think you mentioned like there is like sites of resistance within that people protest, like or being on an anniversary of it. I think what you said, but I think that stands out so much with like how significant the Dodgers have become to like the identity of LA. I think they're the big daddy of sports besides probably the Lakers. Yeah, like there's some they just even just in baseball, you know, Angels don't have the kind of cultural cachet that you know the Dodgers do. And they've become, I think, very, from what I understand, like very synonymous with the Latino community in LA as well. So I guess like how do you reckon with that? One, like it is this kind of they are this outsider that has come in and has displaced people, but also they've become an institution and representative of that at the same time.
It's complicated. Like, obviously, there are a lot of Latino and Hispanic players that have played for the Dodgers and that represent the good things in LA. And some people do say, like, on the Facebook post that I would read, like, how could you support the Dodgers? How could you? It's like, well, the mayor is the one who sold that. The team that prosecuted the social housing projects, and they were the ones having these hidden meetings with the Dodgers. The Dodgers were just looking for a new place. So I think that's how a lot of, from what I'm reading on Facebook, that's how a lot of people reckon with it, that it wasn't, the Dodgers would have bought the land if it was not $1, or they would have moved to South Central, which is originally from, it seems like what they were trying to do, just be accessibility wise. Yeah.
It's a really interesting question. So a colleague of mine makes the argument that as, particularly in the United States, as people have become less traditionally religious, right? I mean, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, that we still have functional needs that religion served us, and therefore people have organically moved towards sports. Again, if I talk about belief, belonging, bonding, behavior, sports kind of do a lot of those things. But he wants to argue that it's this organic transition. It's just a progress of life, right? But you're actually telling a story of an imposed, forced kind of thing that's quite a bit different than that.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's almost like a Dodgers overlay on this local identity.
Ooh, yeah, especially because, I mean, with all American sports, the leagues we know today are not the original leagues that were maybe for the I'm not super well versed on football, but there were leagues for basketball, soccer, and kind of big corporate identities ate them up, rid of them, and now who's left? So many people are tied to these sports on a personal level, and who else do they have to root for? Whose merch can they buy? It's a monopoly kind of on sport.
For sure. Let's go to Dr. Strauss.
Well, first of all, I'll start with B words. So beautiful project. And I'll ask. I have a question for each of you, so I'll ask them together. So one of you at least will have more time to think. Yvé, I'm curious to hear more about your participants and how much variation there is among them in terms of their own cultural background. And does this sort of practice only work among those who have that inherited, however, this hypercultural individualism, or is there any like transcultural belonging that happens sort of beyond that? If that's fine. And then Luke, I love your paper. I'm curious whether that when you were showing us the maps and then talking about, you know, the neighborhoods being like labeled as blight and everything. I'm curious whether the lived religious practice simply got invisibilized or if it was also coded as blight, and what about it and other activities? I'm curious if you found you know, archives or whatever.
Yeah, I think I think both, and the reason I think it kind of became invisible is because you could look at Native American religious preservation efforts and the failure originally to recognize their broader culture as religion, because there really was no separation. And so, yeah, I think they kind of had to make clear that religion happens at church, nowhere else. So no matter what you say, like you might have these festivals in the streets, but religion's at church. We'll let you have the churches. Everything else, no way. So I think,
Yeah.
So I would say I have, I feel like a lot of the people who ended up like actually signing up and going through like the questionnaires and everything would probably self-describe as having an interest in spirituality. So that might be an overlapping piece. Though that being said, I mean, I have somebody from New Zealand, I have somebody who's Catholic, so there is some variation within that. And then I would say, so I feel like maybe the interest in spirituality, even if there is another belief system or cultural connective point underlying that, is still maybe a shared trend. Though again, I think that's interesting because when you ask people what that means, they all have a very different explanation of what being interested in spirituality means. So I don't know if that answered your question.
And demographically, are male, female?
Demographically, I'm about half and half male, female. And then age range, I mean, I didn't specifically ask ages, but I know just from seeing their faces that there are some very young-ish people in the early 20s. And then I would say maybe the oldest person is definitely older than myself, and I'm in my 40s, so pretty good range.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you have a question?
Yes, for Edie, correct? I actually kind of a real question and a second question, and I will use a B. How does your work address esoteric traditions which seem to become hyper-individualized? And my second question is, are you planning to continue with an MA?
So not here. My partner is not from the United States, and both of our families coincidentally live right next to each other in France, and we didn't know that when we met. So going to try to get back to France to be near our families. So anyways, and then, sorry, can you tell me your first question again?
Yes. How does your work address esoteric traditions which seem to become hyper-individualized?
Yeah. So it is a concern of mine, and I think that I've already witnessed that, and it was part of actually why I got out of considering myself to be part of the spiritual community, was because I started to see that there is, and I would describe it as like a capitalist and potentially also alt-right influence coming into spirituality that has started to hyper-individualize some of these esoteric practices, and in my opinion, to harm of the community. So I really do, your question is great, and I think that's why the design of this is, right now telepathy works because it hasn't become also it's telepathy, so it's relational by nature, like you can't do it by yourself.
Sure.
And I think it hasn't become co-opted in any particular space yet. So I think the telepathy tapes are really trying to do that. So I don't know what happens when I run out of strange esoteric things to use as the groundwork for this, but I'm hoping that maybe somebody else will be interested, or maybe along the way we'll discover something. But yeah, I mean, the concern is real, it's there, and I've run into it.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
I feel like I have a question, but I don't know how to frame it. This is for Yvé. Also, I really loved your presentation, and I'm still digesting it. So I am also not a huge sports ball fan. I share in that understanding of passing of balls, trying to incorporate these and the variety right there. But the interwebs, which is always right. I was curious about the impact of sports just from like a very general stat perspective, and like soccer is basically the most watched sport globally, like with 5 billion people watching by that alone, and then followed closely by the Olympics, and then like the impact of NFL, which is according to the interwebs higher than viewership in the Olympics. So, you know, that's really interesting data when I think about collectivism and impact on social norms and the reason why people gather. So as you're exploring new mythology, like how can you maybe take inspiration by that, or has that influenced just in large gatherings and large connection, which I was not expecting to answer to ask this question. Not sports was kind of part of potentially this conversation. So now I'm a little bit intrigued by the correlation of mythology and sports.
Well, this guy literally wrote the book on this question. So I know it's new to me. I think the realization that the Olympics were like a multicultural, multinational shared mythology just dawned on me the other day. I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, here's the thing. So I am inspired, I guess, against any suspicions that I would have had for myself. Like I am quite inspired by Dr. Shoemaker's work and seeing the way that religion can fill those gaps. I will say, I think the Olympics are different than any of the other leagues because they are multicultural. They're bigger than just one region or country, kind of with the fans kind of clumping into a little in-group or whatever. I mean, I know it's still like countries, but it seems a little bit different. So yeah, it's something I'm super probably going to explore more than I ever thought I would. So
Yeah, I know. Ryan is actually the first ASU Religion and Sport Fellowship recipient. And he had the paper coming out about a board game and a satanic movement. That's super interesting. But I actually resisted the whole religion and sports thing at first too, but now I'm in it and I can't get out of it. Really interesting question to think about sports as like some sort of global interconnecting something that people can really gravitate towards. There's a really interesting, and then I'll get to Damien answer the question. There's a really interesting book by a scholar named Huizinga, who actually argues that play is the foundation of all culture. Where we've always thought, like, for people to argue that survival or even some sort of violent war interaction. So the example I always use is, the assumption is that humans needed to hunt for food and created a spear. And then when they weren't hunting, they realized they could invent a game to see who could throw the spear the farthest. But Huizinga says it's actually the opposite. They were actually just playing with a stick and realized they could use it as a tool. So all of culture stems from playing, which I
fetch, not a spear. Oh my god.
Yeah. So it's really I think his argument is fascinating to get to the basic elements of why this would even be a question we could even ask. Damien.
So this is for you too. I love your thing. I just don't know what else to say about it. For being very interesting. And my only other question actually was going to be the one already asked, which is the doctors and the genome community issue. I will not be talking about sports.
Right.
And I would like to find B, but actually probably have more to do with belief, which I think is still important. So from what I understand of your project, there's a bit of stripping down going on of our collective mythologies and beliefs that we already have. But I'm not totally convinced there's anything underneath. It's turtles all the way down, right? It's sort of so. When you're building these new mythologies, are you intending to sort of create something entirely new, or are you asking people to build upon their mythologies together to sort of build a collective that is containing all the weird stuff that's already in our mind, whether it's Buddhism or the Kardashian? I'm serious. Like, a million little things building our mythologies, and whether you're asking them to sort of get rid of the ones that are hyper-capitalized, hyper-individualized, or whether you're asking to build versions of them that can incorporate community or connection. But my other question to this is, you don't have to answer this, but what do you think of the government using cloud?
Oh God. So I'll start by saying that I think that the process of, I knew that was going to happen. There's one person who can ring through.
Always.
And so I'm not really trying to say you have to get rid of anything, and I'm certainly not saying anything is real or right. What I'm interested in is the act itself. I'm interested in the relational act of co-creating something that allows us to sit in a space of the extra super varied with people that we normally wouldn't. And so for me, part of that work is, if you don't understand the unconscious mythologies that live inside of you, it's very hard to do that because you run up against your own dissonance, right? So I like to give the example, if I ask you, do you believe in ghosts? And you're like, no, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, cool, okay. So why don't you come stay in this super haunted house and let me tell you all of these crazy things that have happened here. And while you're there, you start hearing noises and sounds and experiencing lights. You're probably going to think ghosts because somewhere in your unconscious mythology, there's a space for that belief. So, there's the process isn't about what do you believe or changing that. It's, can we co-create together to get away from this sense of everything is about me, my beliefs, how I'm functioning within those beliefs. Am I doing a good enough job? So that's really my motivation is can we do that in a way that's not asking somebody to convert to a religion or to dismiss religion entirely?
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Definitely. Yeah, and then the government using telepathy is really fascinating. I actually own both of the complete reports from Stargate, and I've spent many years. I've literally been studying this for 20 years, so a long time. Yeah.
We're at 15 after. We can wrap up, but I don't want to cut off anybody if you have a question. All right, why don't we wrap up? One more time, why don't you help me?